My name is Sophia, and I never thought I would tell this story out loud. I used to think some things were better kept inside, like quiet secrets that no one else could understand. But lately, I've realized that silence only makes things heavier. So I'm going to tell you everything, the way I lived it, the way I felt it. I grew up in a quiet part of Europe, in a house that didn't look like much from the outside but felt like the whole world to me. It was an old stone house with soft yellow walls and a small garden in the back where my mother grew flowers every spring. She loved that place more than anything. She used to tell me that the house wasn't just made of bricks and wood, it was made of memories. I didn't understand what she meant back then, but I do now. My mother and I were very close. It was always the two of us, even when my father was around. He traveled a lot for work, mostly to America, and when he was home, he seemed distracted, like his mind was somewhere else. Still, I called him Dad with love, because that's what he was supposed to be. I believed that no matter how far he went, he would always come back to us. But everything changed the year my mother got sick. It started quietly, like something we could ignore. She said she was just tired, that she needed rest. But weeks turned into months, and the house slowly became quieter. The laughter faded. The garden stopped blooming. I remember sitting by her bed, holding her hand, pretending not to be scared. She would smile at me, even when she didn't have the strength, and say, "You'll be okay, Sophia. This house will take care of you." After she passed away, the silence became unbearable. The house felt too big, too empty. Every room reminded me of her. I thought my father would step in, that he would finally be there for me the way I needed. For a short time, he tried. He visited more often, called me every evening, and even stayed in the house for a few weeks. But it didn't last. Soon, he started leaving again. One evening, he sat me down in the living room, the same room where my mother used to read her books, and told me he had met someone new. Her name was Clara. He said she made him happy again, that she helped him move forward. I nodded, even smiled, because I didn't want to make things harder for him. I thought maybe this was a good thing, that maybe we could become a new kind of family. A few months later, he invited me to visit him in America. I was nervous, but I agreed. I told myself this was my chance to reconnect with him, to fix what felt broken. When I arrived, everything felt different. His new house was large and modern, with shiny floors and tall windows, but it didn't feel warm. Clara greeted me politely, but there was something distant in her smile. I could tell right away that I didn't belong there. Still, I tried. I stayed quiet, followed their routines, and told myself to be patient. But deep down, I felt it, the distance growing, the space between us getting wider. I just didn't know yet how far it would go. When I returned to Europe after that visit, something inside me had already changed. It wasn't just sadness, it was a quiet understanding that things between me and my father were no longer what they used to be. I tried to focus on my life, on the house, on keeping myself together. Every morning, I opened the windows to let fresh air in, just like my mother used to do. I watered the plants in the garden, even though I didn't have her touch. I told myself that if I kept things alive around me, I wouldn't feel so empty inside. For a few weeks, my father didn't call much. When he did, the conversations felt forced, like we were both pretending everything was normal. He would talk about his new life, about Clara, about how they were preparing for the baby. I listened quietly, saying the right words, even when it hurt. Not once did he ask how I was really doing alone in that house. Not once did he mention my mother. Then one afternoon, everything shifted again. I was sitting in the living room, going through some old papers my mother had left behind, when my phone rang. It was him. I hesitated before answering, but I picked up anyway. "Sophia," he said, his voice unusually direct, "I need to talk to you about something important." Something in his tone made me uneasy. "Okay," I replied slowly. "What is it?" "It's about the house," he said. I looked around the room instinctively, as if the walls themselves were listening. "What about it?" He paused for a moment, then continued. "I need you to sign some documents. It's just a formality, nothing complicated." I felt my chest tighten. "What kind of documents?" "They transfer ownership of the house," he said quickly, as if saying it faster would make it sound less serious. "To me." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. "But the house is already in my name," I said. "Mom made sure of that." "Yes, I know," he replied, sounding slightly impatient now. "But this will make things easier for everyone. You don't really need a house that big, Sophia. And we have plans. Plans. That word echoed in my mind. What kind of plans? I asked. Well, he said, clearing his throat, Clara and I are thinking of moving to Europe. We don't like it here in America anymore. It's too busy, too far from everything. Your house would be perfect for us, especially with the baby. I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't even suggesting a shared arrangement. He wanted my house. For how much? I asked quietly, already knowing the answer would hurt. There was a short silence on the line before he spoke again. No money, Sophia. There's no need for that. We're family. This is just the right thing to do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My fingers tightened around the phone. So you want me to give you the house for free? It's not like that, he said quickly. You'll always have a place with us. We'll take care of everything. You won't have to worry about maintenance or costs. I almost laughed, but it came out as something closer to disbelief. This isn't about maintenance, I said. This is my home. You're being emotional, he replied, his tone changing, becoming colder. You need to think practically. That house is too much responsibility for you. Too much responsibility. The same house my mother trusted me with. The same house that held every memory I had left. I'm not signing anything, I said firmly. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, slower now, heavier. Sophia, he said, lowering his voice, don't make this difficult. This is what's best for everyone. No, I replied. It's what's best for you. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all warmth. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said, but it's mine to make. I ended the call before he could say anything else. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. The house felt different again, but not in the same way as before. This time, it didn't feel empty. It felt protective, like it was standing with me. That evening, I walked through every room slowly. I ran my fingers along the walls, the furniture, the small details my mother had chosen so carefully. I stopped in her old bedroom and looked at the window where she used to sit in the mornings. I won't let them take this, I whispered. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about everything it represented. My mother's love, her trust, and the life we had built together. A few days later, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside were the documents my father had mentioned. Pages filled with legal terms, all leading to one simple outcome. I would give up everything. I didn't even read them twice. I put them back in the envelope, sealed it, and placed it in a drawer. That was the moment I realized something important. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I wasn't the girl who would stay quiet to keep the peace. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take what was mine. The morning they arrived, I didn't know my life was about to turn into something I had only imagined in my worst thoughts. It was a quiet day in Europe, the kind my mother used to love. The sky was soft and grey, and the garden looked peaceful after a light rain. I had just come back from a nearby shop, carrying a small bag of groceries, when I noticed a car parked outside the house. It wasn't a car I recognized. It looked expensive, polished, completely out of place on our quiet street. My first thought was that someone had gotten lost. But then I saw the front door slightly open. My heart started beating faster. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. At first, everything seemed normal. The familiar smell of wood and old books greeted me. But then I heard voices. Their voices. I walked into the living room, and there they were. My father was standing near the window, looking around as if he were inspecting something he already owned. Clara was in the kitchen, speaking on the phone, her tone confident and sharp. In her arms was the baby. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. It felt like I had walked into someone else's life, not my own. What are you doing here? I finally asked, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. My father turned toward me, not surprised at all. Sophia, he said, as if this were a normal visit. You're home. That doesn't answer my question, I replied. Clara ended her call and stepped into the room. We thought it would be easier to come and settle things in person, she said, like she was doing me a favor. Settle what? I asked, even though I already knew. My father sighed, as if he were tired of explaining something obvious. The house, he said. We talked about this. I said no, I answered firmly. He walked closer, lowering his voice. You didn't understand the situation properly. We're here now, and we need to move forward. Move forward. I looked around the room and noticed something that made my stomach turn. My mother's things had been moved. Some of the decorations were gone. Boxes were stacked near the hallway. They hadn't just come to talk. They had come to stay. You've already started changing things, I said, disbelief filling my voice. Clara stepped in again. We're planning renovations, she said casually. This place needs updates. It's a bit outdated. Outdated. That word felt like an insult to everything my mother had built. This is not your house, I said, louder now. It will be, my father replied, his tone hardening. Once you stop being stubborn. I could feel something inside me breaking, but at the same time, something else was forming, something stronger. I'm not signing anything, I said again. And you can't just come here and act like this place belongs to you. Clara shifted the baby in her arms and looked at me with clear irritation. You're being selfish, she said. We have a child to think about. We need stability. I let out a small, bitter laugh. And what about me? I asked. Did you ever think about that? Neither of them answered. That silence told me everything. My father's face grew colder. You're young, Sophia. You don't understand how life works yet. This house is wasted on you. Wasted. I repeated. This house was left to me by Mom. She trusted me with it. And I'm your father, he snapped. I know what's best. No, I said quietly but firmly. You don't. The room fell into a heavy silence. Even the baby stopped making noise, as if sensing the tension. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. You need to leave, I said. Clara's eyes widened slightly. Excuse me? You heard me, I replied. This is my house. You don't have the right to be here. My father looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe he expected me to give in, like I always had before. But this time was different. We're not leaving, he said. Not until this is resolved. Then we'll resolve it legally, I answered. Because I have every document that proves this house is mine. He hesitated for just a moment, and I knew that he understood I was serious. Fine, he said finally. If that's how you want to do this, we'll take it to court. I nodded. Do it. That night was one of the longest of my life. They stayed in the house, acting like temporary owners, while I locked myself in my room. I could hear them moving around, talking, planning. It felt like strangers had invaded my home. But instead of breaking down, I started preparing. The next morning, I gathered all the documents my mother had left me. Every paper, every signature, every legal detail. She had been careful, more careful than I ever realized. She had made sure the house was protected, completely in my name, with no loopholes. I also reached out for legal help. It cost me around $5,000, money I had been saving for my future. But in that moment, I knew this was my future. Days turned into weeks as the situation grew more tense. My father and Clara stayed longer than they should have, but they couldn't ignore the legal reality. Every document, every record pointed to one truth. They had no claim. And slowly, I saw the confidence in their faces begin to fade. One evening, as I stood in the living room, looking at my mother's photograph, I realized something important. I wasn't just defending a house. I was defending myself. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. The final decision didn't come with drama or raised voices. It came quietly, through a letter that confirmed what I had known all along. Legally, the house was mine. Completely and without question. My father and Clara had no right to it, no matter how much they believed they deserved it. When I held that paper in my hands, I didn't feel victory the way I had imagined. I felt something steadier, something like clarity. That evening, I stood in the living room, the same room where everything had started to fall apart, and everything had slowly come back together. My father was sitting in silence, staring at the floor. Clara stood near the window, holding the baby, her expression tense and distant. The house felt heavy, like it was waiting for something to end. It's over, I said calmly, placing the letter on the table in front of them. You've seen the documents. You know what this means. My father didn't look at the paper right away. He already knew. I could see it in his face, the frustration, the disbelief, and something else, something like regret, though he would never admit it. Clara was the first to speak. This isn't fair, she said, her voice tight. We came here to build a life. You're just throwing us out. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt distance. You tried to take something that wasn't yours, I said. This was never your home. My father finally stood up, his movements slow, almost tired. Sophia, he began, his voice softer than it had been in weeks, we can still figure something out. There's no need to rush this. I shook my head. You already tried to figure something out. You asked me to give up everything for nothing. That was your solution. He didn't answer. I'm giving you until tomorrow, I continued. That's enough time to pack your things and leave. Clara let out a quiet, frustrated breath, but she didn't argue this time. Maybe she understood that there was nothing left to say. Maybe she realized that control had slipped out of her hands. The rest of the night passed in silence. They stayed in their room, and I stayed in mine. But it felt different now. The fear was gone. The uncertainty had disappeared. For the first time since they had arrived, I felt like I could breathe again. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was unusually quiet. I made myself a cup of tea and stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the garden. The flowers were starting to bloom again, small touches of color returning to the space my mother had loved so much. Around midday, I heard movement in the hallway. Suitcases rolling. Doors opening and closing. I didn't go to see them. I didn't feel the need to. When I finally stepped outside, their car was already waiting. My father stood by the trunk, while Clara sat inside with the baby. For a moment, I thought he might come back to say something, to apologize, to explain, to try one last time. But he didn't. He looked at me from a distance, his expression unreadable. Then he got into the car, closed the door, and just like that, they were gone. I stood there, watching as the car disappeared down the quiet road. I expected to feel something heavy, something painful. But instead, I felt light. Not happy, not exactly, but free. I went back inside and closed the door behind me. The silence returned, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Over the next few weeks, I began to rebuild the house, not in a big or expensive way, but in small, meaningful steps. I spent about $2,000 fixing the things they had disturbed. I repainted the walls in soft colors, cleaned every corner, and carefully placed my mother's belongings back where they belonged. Each small action felt like I was putting a piece of my life back together. I also made a practical decision. The house was large, larger than I needed on my own. So I rented out one of the rooms for $300 a month. The woman who moved in was named Elena. She was kind, quiet, and respectful. She didn't ask too many questions, but she brought a sense of calm into the house that I hadn't realized I needed. Slowly, life began to feel normal again. As for my father, I never heard from him after that day. No calls, no messages, nothing. At first, I wondered if he ever thought about what had happened, if he regretted the choices he made. But over time, those thoughts faded. I stopped waiting for answers. One evening, I found myself sitting in the garden, just as my mother used to do. The air was cool, and the sky was clear. I closed my eyes for a moment and let myself feel everything, not the anger, not the loss, but the strength that had come from it all. This is still ours, I whispered softly. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Because this wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that I had stood my ground, that I had protected what mattered, and that I had chosen myself when no one else did. And that, more than anything, was enough.